Okay, welcome back to another episode of Pacific Legends Unleashed. And here we are, only 3 months later to
Several
finally
years after our last.
finish off the Vietnam series. We really got bogged down, didn't we?
Yeah, we found it hard to get out, just like the Americans did.
Yeah, there's a lot of corruption.
There was a lot of pressure on us to finish that series, but we just sort of got a bit bored.
We got in over our head, didn't we?
We did a little
We
bit.
didn't realise how hard it was going to be. We thought we could get a quick win.
Yeah.
And, you know,
The good thing is that no one's been waiting for it. So
yeah, no one's lost their life,
that's true.
so that's always a bonus.
Yeah, but we did think it was probably time to jump in and finish off our 3-episode series on Vietnam.
Yeah, for the 5 people that have got through the first episodes, I mean, it's only right that we give them the third and final episode of Tiger Man, especially after the effort put into the cover art.
Absolutely. The universally appreciated cover art.
Yes.
Yeah. So we did sort of talk about leaving it and just moving on to a different topic. So this is sort of, it's not really rushed, but I'm just going to tell this story fairly quickly and try and wrap up exactly what happened to Big Barry over there in the jungles of Vietnam.
Please do.
So if you remember in our last episode, we finished off with Colonel Sarong meeting Barry and appraising him and agreeing that this Aussie soldier was probably the man for the job.
Yeah.
But the big question is, what was the job?
That's right.
That was Barry's question. He didn't really know what was going on. So Sarong told Barry that he was going to be reporting to the Combined Studies Division, or the CSD, which is basically like when the CIA putting on a bit of a funny
The
moustache.
CIA spelt differently
Yeah.
for a dyslexic.
No one will ever notice.
Yeah.
So it was the CIA, essentially. It wasn't really fooling anybody. And so Barry goes to the CSD/CIA headquarters and he's introduced to a couple of agents. So Strathern and Mills, and they're 2 men that he really likes. Mills in particular, he trusts and feels like he can work with them. And to sort of round out his whirlwind induction day, and just to respect the traditions of his, American handlers, Barry got to choose his preferred handgun.
Oh,
So,
yes.
Trusty Browning 9mm like the rest of the CIA guys wear.
Yep, nice.
And after that, he's off on a comfy Air America flight up to Bun Ma Tot. And he's given the sit rep up there, which for alpha males like yourself,
Rico.
used to using,
Situation report
military jargon or quotes from
from Madagascar.
DreamWorks, films. He's given the situation report when he gets there. And basically, the Viet Cong are in the area. Remember, this is the Central Highlands of Vietnam.
Yep.
And they're bringing men and equipment down from the north through the highland jungles to supply the forces that are in Saigon and that wider Mekong Delta, southern Vietnamese area.
On that famous trail.
Yeah, that's where they're bringing it all through. So he's up there, sort of at the headwaters of it. Now, to oppose that flow, the CIA were funding 2 paramilitary operations. So they're operations, not carried out by the state, but kind of carried out by the state. It's a very Cold War sort of way of doing things.
Sneaky.
Yeah. And Barry's first job was to figure out whether the local groups that the CIA had recruited to carry out these operations were up to the task.
Yeah.
Well, that was sort of step 2. Step 1 was actually figuring out whether or not those people existed. The local province chief was being given $2,500 US a month, which was supposed to pay the salaries of 300 men that he promised were real.
And that would be supporting kind of...
Yeah, it's that paramilitary
South.
operation. Let's disrupt the flow. Let's gather intelligence. Let's...
recruit.
Yeah, recruit. Let's do what we can to help the South Vietnamese cause.
Yeah.
So after 24 hours in Ban Mi Tut, CIA stooge Mills gives Barry a bag full of cash, which he said would just be topped up. He's like, if you run out, let us know. We'll give you some more cash.
Sounds like teaching.
Yeah, very similar.
Yeah.
And Mills essentially says, well, I'll be back in a couple of weeks then. So Barry asks the question that probably any of us would. The hell am I supposed to be doing here?
Yeah.
And Mills
Got
just...
a bag of cash and
Yeah.
what do I do with it?
What do I do with it? Mills essentially says, I don't know, mate. Just walk around, meet someone,
Go down the alley, roll some dice,
find a place to live.
do some
Not
gambling.
your mum.
Yeah, fair.
But it is a bit of a difficult, ambiguous, and very vague situation to sort of be thrust into. So Barry had a lot of questions. But we know that he's a culturally sensitive kind of guy. And he did come to terms with his new surroundings. And he did make friends. He did ingratiate himself with the locals.
Made friends with money.
Yeah, he made friends with bags of money.
Yeah.
But as he did sort of wander around the town, the complexity of the situation that he was in became really apparent, like quite fast. So the people that are indigenous to Vietnam's Central Highlands, they're known as the Montagnards, and that's French for mountain people. And there's about 200,000 of this ethnic group in the Highlands in the 1960s, and many of them were deeply sympathetic to the Viet Cong and their cause. So I'm sure you remember the South Vietnamese policy of like forced resettlement, strategic hamlets.
Yep. Take people from the countryside and bang them into a village and say, you know, we'll look after you.
Yeah.
And now you're on our side.
Yeah, you're welcome. So taking people basically from their ancestral lands and moving them to these spaces, strategic hamlets.
That's always worked well, hasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Just pushing peasants around with no regard for what they want is usually a strategy for success. That was the brainchild of, it was No Dinh Diem's brother, No Dinh Nhu, and he was advised by a bit of a double agent in the South Vietnamese government and army who was working for the communists. So it's a good little bit of spycraft going on there.
Nice.
This is what you should do. But a lot of the Montagnards, back to my original point, were really sympathetic with the Viet Cong cause, with the northern cause, and didn't like what was happening in South Vietnam. Local authorities were pretty worried about that sentiment among the Montagnard, about them rising up maybe, rebellion. And so, like any good government, they just took all their stuff away. Like, no more spears for you.
That's how you control them.
Yeah, no weapons.
No pointy sticks.
No, you just take away their ability to hurt you. But then the Americans turned up. And by 1962, there were about 2,000 Green Berets who have gone into that specific area to the people that had been disarmed and given them special forces training and modern military weapons.
We'll take away your spears, but here's a machine gun.
Here's a mounted machine gun. Classic prank from the US there on the South Vietnamese.
Yeah, nice.
Peterson does a little bit of digging, and he's not that surprised to find that these 300 men that have been promised to exist are always out doing maneuvers or they're on leave whenever he wants to inspect the troops. Yep. So obviously he knows what's going on there. He's not an idiot. And he also learned that the driver that he had been given was related to the seemingly dodgy province chief who was supposed to be in charge of these 300 men. So keeping tabs on Barry, making sure that he's towing the line, not asking too many tricky questions.
That sounds like when Aero comes to school, you're always given leave, eh?
Yeah, well, you are. Yeah.
For some reason, they always give me a week off that week, and I never understand why.
Yeah, go and do some PD in Auckland.
Yeah.
We'll tell you when
I've
you
also
can come
never
back.
been in the staff photo. It's like I don't exist at the school.
No, you're a highly valued member of staff.
Yeah, thank you.
Barry, in this situation, the vulnerability sort of inherent to being thrust out in the boondocks on your own is sinking in. But we know he's been to torture school. He's an expert in spycraft.
Yeah. He knows how to pull off a fingernail.
Yeah, absolutely. So he leaves his room in his hotel that he's staying in every day and makes sure that the papers in his drawer are at a particular angle. Yeah. And he leaves a human hair, very James Bondish.
Puts a bucket on top of the door.
Yeah.
You know?
Full on shame on the guy coming in.
Yeah.
But the hair's disturbed, and he realizes that every single time that he leaves his room is being searched.
Uh-huh.
I thought I'd quote a little bit from Frank Walker's book here, because in this period where Barry's settling in, he's vulnerable, and he's essentially, they try to chase him out of town right from the offset. So this is what Frank Walker had to say about this situation. Then, whoever was watching him stepped the game up another notch. Late one night, while lying in bed, he heard someone moving outside his door. He could see most of the room by the moonlight filtering through the curtainless windows facing onto the veranda. He watched as the door handle turned slowly and quietly reached over to open the bedside drawer where he kept his gun. The drawer was locked. Todgy's an expert.
Yeah, nice.
He looked aghast at the keys still hanging in the lock on the door. He could see somebody was trying to push the key out of the lock from the outside. It was an old-fashioned lock, so that if they pushed the key out on his side, they could put a key in on the other side and unlock the door.
Genius.
I've never seen a lock like that, but I'm not old-fashioned.
What about in your red room?
Don't talk about it. How did you get in? He would not have time to pull the key out of the door lock, run back to the bedside drawer, and unlock it to get his gun out. So he grabbed the only weapon he could find, one of his heavy army boots. He stood holding it up, ready to defend himself. Perhaps sensing movement, whoever was outside suddenly dropped any pretense at stealth. They kicked the door and hurled themselves at it, trying to crash their way through. but the door held. All went quiet. Peterson stood still, waiting. He watched, barely breathing as one shadow crossed the veranda window, then another. 2 men stood there, peering in. Peterson could see them clearly. Stocky, tough-looking Vietnamese men staring at him with deadly cold eyes. Assassins. He knew they could see him as he stood in the middle of the room holding his army boot. Seconds ticked by as they stared at Peterson and he stared back. No one said a thing. Then they left. Peterson rushed to the door, grabbed his keys and unlocked the drawer to pull out his pistol. He looked out to the veranda. Nothing. He unlocked the front door. There was no sign anybody had ever been there, but it was clearly a warning. Back off. Or else.
Yeah, but he's got a boot.
I know. That's why they ran.
Yeah.
They
weren't expecting that, were they?
They weren't going to be seen again.
Yeah.
So I think he won that competition.
Yeah, nice.
But if things were going badly for Barry, he's being intimidated, they were going even worse for No Din Ziem and his brother.
Oh, why's that?
Well, this time they were the victims of a CIA-backed coup, and it essentially resulted in them lying face down in a pool of their own blood
Were
in
they
an
all right?
APC. No, it was mortal. Yeah.
Ah,
there were just enough gunshot wounds to kill them.
what, 12?
Yeah, to the face.
Okay.
And so being dead's pretty bad news for them. But it's pretty good news for Barry because their death and the changing government ushered in a host of improvements and changes, appointments throughout the whole country.
And they weren't great, were they?
It depends which side of the fence you're on. I mean, if you were Buddhist, not great. They loved the Catholic Church.
Yeah, true. So they're
yeah.
good if you're Catholic.
Yeah. Well, we talked a bit.
They're good if you're corrupt.
Yeah, yeah. We
Anyway.
talked a bit about them in the first episode, and the level of corruption that
Yeah.
they obviously rigged the votes. That the 1954 Geneva Accords, they weren't interested in honouring the elections and the promises, and
It's quite wholesome that the CIA just turned on them and...
that's what the CIA are like.
Yeah.
They're like the world's big brother.
Yeah, it's
You-
nice.
yeah.
Nice of them to keep an eye on,
They'll take care of any bullies.
Yeah.
They're always doing the right thing
Great
for
stuff.
the right reasons.
Great stuff, CIA.
So the new chief of the province, Darlak Province, which is where Barry's hanging out at the moment, is somebody that Barry will get on with. But then the head of security, who's basically second in command there, him and Barry were pretty distrustful of each other right from the get-go. But Barry's a smooth operator, plays the game really well.
Smooth operator.
Very good.
Thank you.
He understands that the new guy loves whiskey and hunting.
Yeah,
So
like any man.
absolutely, he's a man's man.
Yeah.
Drinking whiskey in his man cave, shooting things in the face. And Barry exploits his love of whiskey and guns by plying him with whiskey from the CIA and some fancy hunting rifles. And
Nice.
eventually he manages to convince this guy to relocate 100 montagnards to a village outside of town where they could be trained properly, where Barry would have complete control and acting with autonomy, he would be able to direct them in the way that best fulfilled his mission.
Yeah, nice.
Now, at this point, his mission, he's figured out the 300 men don't exist. Now he's managed to wrangle 100, move them outside of town, and they just want to gather intelligence. They want to be disruptive if they can, but, it's the early stages, so just figure out what you can know, gain some info. So the force, as they move outside of this village, they're given a new name, the Trong Son Force. And with the help of a couple of trusty translators, Barry rents a large 5-bedroom house. It's got this big walled garden in it, which basically could serve as his headquarters and his home. And he had members of the Trong Son Force stand guard at the gate. They would patrol the grounds. He really turned it into a base, essentially.
Yeah.
For reasons I can't quite figure out, he also started to collect a bunch of animals.
Mm.
Well, he was kind of given them.
As you do.
As you do. The outgoing police chief apparently gave him a bunch of peacocks.
Uh-huh.
So Ziem and his brother killed. He's given the boot. And he's like, Barry, my peacocks, mate. Will you look after them? Barry says, yeah, sure. I'm on a really important mission.
Yeah.
And I don't want to draw attention to myself.
Yeah.
But give us your peacocks.
Yeah.
After he gets the peacocks, he ends up with a deer,
Yeah.
An
Standard. An ape.
a sun bear.
Oh, yeah.
So not a giant bear.
No, just
it's
the
not.
little nice ones.
Yeah, that's pretty discreet.
The cuddly ones.
Yeah. A leopard.
Yes.
And, of course, he gets a tiger cub as well.
Oh, and a tiger cub.
Tiger cub as well, yeah.
Yeah, just
Tiger cub for the Tiger Man. Not that he's the Tiger Man yet.
Yeah.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves. From Frank Walker's book, speaking about the leopard, he writes, Peterson called her Fatima and slept with her next to him in his bed.
Excuse me?
He
Well,
had a great bond with his animals.
I hope it retracted its claws.
I suspect that this is part of the CIA's instructions for him. befriend a leopard, seduce a leopard. No, regardless of why this happened, and talk about keeping a low profile, Barry becomes known about town as a bit of a wild man.
Oh yeah, it's probably fair.
Yeah, you shag a leopard and you're gonna.
Sorry.
Well, that's not explicitly mentioned in any of the materials, but
I think you're kind of filling in some gaps that don't need to be filled in
is
here.
Is this libelous? He's dead. It's fine. Anyway, he's a bit of a wild man. The locals are going, oh, check out this guy.
For the record, the leopard is on the same bed as Barry, right?
Yeah.
Nothing more, nothing less.
Well, let's not read too much into it either way. Let's leave it open.
Okay.
He sleeps with a leopard
and
leave it at that. Anyway, he's got this tiger cub, but people now know, all right, here's a white man in town.
Couple of peacocks,
Sleeps
with a leopard.
Yeah. But he's recognized. He's not incognito anymore. And he starts to get a little bit more cautious. He was already, hanging the human hair over the drawer and the bucket on the door.
Yeah.
But now he says to his kitchen staff, look, whatever you do, the only meat you're able to serve us, me and the 100 men and the peacocks, you have to slaughter it yourself.
Yeah.
One of his cooks goes to the market one day and someone comes up, opens a cloak, bunch of chickens hanging there. Very good price.
In the cloak?
In the cloak.
Okay.
I'm extrapolating again.
Yeah.
Someone approaches and says, would you like to buy some chicken? And she goes, sure. I won't feed it to the men specifically, but it'll be fine for the animals.
For the peacocks.
Yeah, for the peacocks or whatever else wants a little nibble.
Yeah.
Takes it home and she cooks it up, feeds it to Fatima the leopard, and then just watches Barry cry over Fatima's corpse.
Fatima dies.
Dead.
Oh, from the chicken?
Much like Captain Cook.
Yeah.
From the chicken.
Yeah.
So
Campylobacter. Salmonella.
Yeah, real bad case of it.
Okay.
But somebody is clearly targeting Barry here. Perhaps it's the Viet Cong.
Targeting his heartstrings.
Exactly, going for the things that he loves most.
Yeah.
And it's a devastating loss for Barry. He takes it hard, but he's still got an ape. He's still got a sun bear.
It's not the same, though, is it?
No, it's not the same as Fatima, but out of sight, out of mind. He just tries to get on with it. He's a soldier, stuff to do. So he's got his menagerie by his side, minus one leopard.
Yeah.
And he gets to work. So he trained his men. He used CIA funds and gifts just to win over the locals. Here,
nice.
Kid, do you want some candy?
Yeah. Cash.
A little bit of cash here and there.
A couple of cashies.
Yeah, and he just becomes a familiar face about town. He's always pleasant and polite.
Hey, the peacock guy.
Hey. And hey.
Did he wear a peacock feather in his hat?
He just wore the peacock.
Undercover.
Anyway, he uses that sort of natural curiosity and gift with cultural differences and how to be sensitive and sensible, and he ingratiates himself. He does a fantastic job of it. And in the course of that day-to-day training regime for him and his 100 men, he would occasionally take them out on field missions to surrounding villages. They'd attempt to build rapport with the chiefs out there, gather intelligence, and just further establish their presence in the wider area.
Yeah.
Now, on one of those trips, they're out in a pretty remote spot. Barry was asked by one of the chiefs, who'd probably heard of Barry's zoo, if he could help them catch a tiger.
Nice.
Now, in our second episode, it talked about Barry loving Africa.
Yeah.
He'd always fancied himself. It was a bit of a fantasy, like big game hunter.
Yeah, big cats.
Take down one of the big ones, and here's a tiger presented to him. Silver platter. He's like, yeah, I'll kill that tiger.
Yeah.
So he's stoked, and he uses, much like they did in Jurassic Park, I don't know if it's where he got the idea, but he chucks a goat.
Oh, nice.
Out in the middle of the jungle.
I was going to say peacock, but goat's even better.
Ties it to a stake and just waits. It starts to rain. They take shelter, come back, goat's gone.
Any blood?
I don't know. I'm not about the details. I'm just broad strokes here. The tiger is around and the goat is gone.
Yeah.
So, right, second night, put the goat in again. I don't know how they didn't see it. Looked away for a moment, looked back, gone.
Ah.
Third night, they build this little hunting blind, so they're up a tree. Goat once again staked in the middle of this clearing, and they're just waiting, and they're determined to not break eye contact with this goat.
Yeah.
Because they know that this tiger's a shifty customer.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, the air's thick. There's mosquitoes. There's humidity. It's just swelteringly hot, even though it's the middle of the night. Barry's sitting there trying to look through the sweat covering his eyes, and he hears this psst. He looks down to one of his men who's at the bottom of this platform, and he's like, go away, mate. Psst. So asks him what's going on, and he's told, VC coming.
Viet Cong.
Viet Cong. So the VC are inbound, and they managed to get away just in the nick of time. And here's my question to you. What was being hunted here, and what was the bait?
Wow. Sounds like he was being hunted.
Yeah. Were they hunting a tiger with a goat, or were the VC hunting Barry with a tiger?
Was there a tiger?
Well, apparently the place stunk of piss. So either Amelia Earhart had flown over the area, or the unmistakable scent of tiger urine gave the game up. Anyway, that's a little side story.
Yeah. The double bluff.
The double bluff.
Yeah, nice.
But again, it shows that Barry is a marked man. First, Fatima dies through poisoning. Now, he thinks he's in control here, but it looks like the VC are coming for him. And the VC had a policy of targeting white men because essentially if you were white in Vietnam at this time, you were viewed as American.
Yeah, there weren't many white men on the North Vietnamese side, were there?
No. No, very few.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter if you spoke with an Aussie accent, mate.
No, food eggs.
They're not listening to that. Those distinctions are lost. You're essentially a foreigner in their land, and they know that you're all essentially working for the same cause.
Yeah.
So Barry had to run for his life quite a few times because white men were targeted. Many of them were killed, especially in the northern parts of South Vietnam and where Barry was in the highlands. And his men would often act as those sentries, the security guards going, psst, VC coming.
Yeah.
So obviously they're loyal to him. They're protecting him. And all the while this is going on, Barry's out there hunting tigers. He's observing the flow of the VC down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. He knows that it's increasing. He's training his men. He's using everything he learned with his granddad in Malaya from the Montagnards themselves, who are teaching him as much as he's teaching them. And they're turning into a really disciplined and cohesive, effective fighting force.
Nice.
And they were also relatively well-funded and equipped. And with things going pretty well, Mills, who is the CIA stooge that Barry gets on with, says, hey, Barry, go and recruit another 250.
Yeah, just give him a massive bag of cash, no problem.
Yeah, bag of cash. Go find 250 men, Montagnards. But he's also joined by another Aussie at this point, Warrant Officer Bevan Stokes.
Big Bev.
Big Bev, who had trained with Big Baz in Australia.
Baz and Bev, let's go.
So they were known to each other. He joined the gang, Bevan, as the Trung Son force kept expanding into those neighbouring areas, you know, as a result of the good work him and his men were doing and going out and meeting people. So Stokes, the new guy, was really effective in this expansion in particular. That was sort of his job.
Yeah.
He set up a camp really close to the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and it was surrounded by VC activity. So it was a real hotbed, and there were a lot of VC-aligned Montagnards in that area as well. They launched a successful raid on a VC stronghold, though, and after doing that, a bounty was put on the head of Bevan Stokes, 50,000 piastres, which was worth more than about 3 years' salary for a soldier.
He'll be stoked, Bev.
Good call.
Pretty happy with that.
Yeah, well, dead or alive, we want this guy.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a testament to Stokes' reputation with his men that he wasn't, like you talked about fragging in one of our previous episodes, that one of his own men didn't just chuck a bullet in the back of his head while he's walking down a trail.
Yeah, that'd be pretty tempting, wouldn't it?
Pocket some money for him and his
3 years
family.
of cash.
Yeah. But Barry's not just twiddling his thumbs. Like, Bevan's doing a good job. Barry's also leading and directing his men. They're going in these ever-expanding patrols, raids on VC strategic positions, and soon enough, posters are popping up all over the area. Peterson and Stokes, hand-drawn, really badly, wanted dead or alive posters for these guys. And it was about this time that Peterson's unit, Barry's unit, was first called the Tiger Men. And apparently they used that name first of all because of the CIA-issued camouflage uniforms that they were wearing. But Barry thought, you know what?
Let's get into merchandise.
Yeah, let's use this. Let's spin a profit.
Copyright, Tiger Man.
Yeah, absolutely. So he goes, next time he's in Saigon, he gets 1,000 tiger head badges made, these little pins.
Awesome.
Told his men, you're feared by the enemy. They're calling you Tiger Men.
Nice.
And they're all hyped up and they're all G'd up. He gives each and every one of them this little badge at a special ceremony. And Barry said that his men all of a sudden stood a little taller, marched a little snappier, thinking of themselves as a special elite unit.
Do they all get kind of like numbers on the back of their shirts?
Nah, it didn't go that far. I don't know if the budget stretched that far. But Barry was really impressed in this moment because he felt like these Montagnards, the people under his command, were more loyal now to the unit, you know, and their in-group, the Tiger Men, than they were to some of those outside forces, which could previously have been a bit of a distraction.
Nice.
Speaking of distractions, but also Montagnard loyalty, in September of 1964, that's where we are now, Montagnard soldiers stationed at an American Special Forces base complained that their ARVN commander was stealing from their pay.
Oh.
Yeah, bit of a dog act. And Montagnard soldiers, not just the ones at the base, but in general, saw this as a bit of an opportunity to air their grievances, and they started to plan, like really organize wider demonstrations. People aren't happy about this, and when I say people, South Vietnamese government, they're always wary of the Montagnards. Remember, they took their spears off them.
Yeah.
But America as well, the CIA, they don't want split loyalties here. They just want everybody sort of working together.
Yeah.
The Montagnard push
for the right team, eh?
Yeah. Montagnard push for independence maybe is on the cards, and they just can't be bothered with that at this time. Barry insists that he doesn't control all Montagnards in the province, obviously, but he was explicitly told at this point that if anything bad happened, that he would be held responsible for it.
Oh.
So things escalated, totally outside of his control. A US camp was seized. Bunch of shots were fired. Bunch of throats were slit.
Ooh.
It got pretty hectic. People squared up.
Shots fired.
Yeah, but Barry's asked to help mediate a negotiation. So can we try and stop it here and figure out what we can do to just get things back on track?
So he's obviously got good language skills.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Well, he's got translators with him too.
Oh, yeah.
And most of the time he communicates through them.
Yeah.
But he just knows the right things to say. He knows how to walk that real tightrope.
Hey, fierce sucker the Sav guys, why don't we all just calm down?
Yeah, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
So for this negotiation, they're traveling through dirt roads, thick jungle, which was incredibly hostile to them in every way, especially at this time. Barry, who's got Sarong with him in tow, is standing in front of the rebel leaders, and it's not going well, despite Sarong's insistence that Barry sort it all out for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Barry turns and says, "Look, sir, it's a decision they're going to have to make themselves. I cannot make them do anything. All I can do is try to persuade them." And apparently at this, Sarong flares up, snarls at Barry, threatens him, tells him that if he can't sort this out, he's on the next plane. His career will never go anywhere. Frank Walker, again, described the insanity of this situation. You know, you imagine that you're that far from home. It's a powder keg.
Yeah.
There's very little you can do, and you're just getting screamed at.
Man, that'd be stressful.
Says, Peterson was stunned. The rebels in the next room could easily kill them. They had already killed many Vietnamese, and they held a number of Americans hostage. So that's at a couple of bases.
Yeah.
They could be executed, and their bodies would never be found. The only way these rebels would come back with them to Bon Mi Thot was if Peterson could persuade them to do so. Getting angry and threatening them would achieve exactly the opposite. And so in that moment, Barry lost a lot of respect for Sarong, who just had no handle on the finesse required.
Yeah.
The U.S. Army Special Operations History Office writes about this flashpoint, and it's known to history as the Montagnard Uprising. They write, "The Montagnard Uprising of 1964 was a complex event with the potential to alter the course of the Vietnam War," which some people say is a little bit dramatic, but you know, you've got a very influential group right at the crossroads between North and South, right, where a lot of traffic's moving down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So if things don't go well and the CIA can't control their asset and complete the mission there, there's the potential for real disruption. But ultimately that uprising was quelled, maybe a combined effort of diplomacy.
Couple of cashies.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of luck, a little bit of cash on the side. But as a result of his actions during the uprising, and probably suggesting that Sarong was able to calm down a little bit after he had his tizzy in the jungle, on Sarong's recommendation, Barry was awarded the Military Cross for his efforts.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, and Sarong's recommendation stated, "The hours of negotiations were a tribute to Peterson's language skills and to his tact. He smoothed every explosive statement and opened up a new tack at each impasse. A single misplaced word might have signaled the end to the government presence in the Highlands." So Barry employed every trick in the book to prevent this Montagnard uprising from becoming a full-blown revolution. But he hadn't yet seen everything that Vietnamese jungle was going to throw at him. Towards the end of 1964, Barry was asked by the CIA to create a secure zone away from prying eyes, with the express purpose of it being a place for a Vietnamese Special Forces team to practice nighttime parachute jumps into the jungle.
Oh.
Very hush-hush. No one was to know about it or speak of it, and he needed to keep it to a really small inner circle. And Barry does as he's asked. Everything goes according to plan until the third night of drops, when a young American captain landed a little too hard in tall trees and broke his neck.
Oh.
So his body is just sent to the local hospital in unmarked clothes by his captain.
Oh, so he's dead, right?
Yeah, he's dead.
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
breaks his neck and he's dead.
Yep.
Goes to the hospital, and the people in charge didn't think anything of it.
Oh, no big deal.
Don't worry about it. Send him to the hospital. But
Yeah.
Barry, of course, he knows that in the area, the VC have their eyes and ears everywhere.
Uh-huh.
And pretty much anyone with eyes and who knows anything about warfare will see the pattern of injuries on this man's body and the broken neck and go, this looks like a parachute, not injury.
Yeah.
And he thinks we can't let them know that we're practicing these jumps in this area. That's bad news.
So he goes and stabs him 4,000 times.
Yes, beats him to death all over again. No, Barry hits the town to find the captain in charge of the training program.
Yeah.
Finds him in a bar, absolutely steamed, bashing away on a drum kit, and he's like, can I have a word, please?
It's like, no.
What?
I'm just doing a drum solo.
Yeah, this guy's oblivious to the danger. But Barry lets him know it's probably not a good idea just to leave the body in the hospital morgue, where it will be examined in the morning. And the captain goes, yeah, righto, mate, I understand. Barry has a chat with one of his Montagnard men who happens to know the old bloke who looks after the morgue at night.
Yeah.
Turns out the old guy loves a bit of whiskey, one or 10, you know.
Nice.
So Barry goes into the CIA store, grabs a couple of bottles of Johnny Walker and gives them to his man, who in turn takes them to the old bloke looking after the morgue, and they get on it together. So when the coast is relatively clear, this old guy's fully liquored up. Barry gets the signal. They manage to grab the body out of the morgue. They walk out, two of them together, holding him upright, put him in the Jeep, sit him upright.
Pretend he's alive.
Pretend he's fine. Yeah.
It's like, what is it, Weekend at Bernie's?
Yeah.
Nice.
Just in case though anyone's watching, if they're seen by a guard or they're sitting upright. And they drive right through town all the way to Barry Zoo.
Feed him to the bear.
Where, they feed him to the sun bear. No, that was sort of the end of the story. It's problem solved at that point. The body just gets flown back to the States in a Hessian bag.
Yeah.
I didn't just dump him in the garden and leave.
Yeah, nice.
Job well done, boys. Yeah. The old bloke certainly didn't seem suspicious, though. Barry later said, the strange thing was the hungover morgue attendant never asked where the missing body had gone.
Did he know there was a missing body?
I don't know. And if he did, probably wasn't good to draw attention to it anyway.
Yeah.
But that's another highlight from Barry's time in Vietnam.
Nice.
He broke a dead guy out of a morgue.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. And this brings us up to 1965. And by this time, Barry spent a whopping 16 months leading his CIA-backed Montagnard force. And he's a bit of a legend now in the Vietnamese Highlands. His Tiger Men, there's about 1,000 of them.
Oh.
And they're one of the most effective anti-communist units in the region by pretty much any metric.
Especially because they're locals, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not just foreigners coming in that don't know anything about the area.
Yeah, that's key to the whole program. Storm clouds are gathering, though. You think everything's going fine for Barry?
Uh-huh. Oh, no. That doesn't sound good.
That was thunder.
Whoa.
We spare no expense in the sound effects on the show.
I could probably put actual sound effects in there if you want.
Not better than that, you could. Okay. Anyway, these storm clouds represent the CIA and a new initiative that they're rolling out across South Vietnam. They called
Operation Rolling Thunder.
No, good, very good guess.
Okay.
I sort of set you up for failure in that one.
Damn it.
No, this is the Phoenix program.
Ah, yeah, the Wellington Phoenix program, because that's a failure.
Yeah, everyone was wearing yellow and black.
And playing terrible. Playing poor football.
People could see them immediately in the jungle. Anyway, the CIA described this new initiative as a set of programs that sought to attack and destroy the political infrastructure of the Viet Cong.
That sounds wholesome as well.
It does, yeah. Well, I mean, you know what they're like.
The CIA's done it again.
Yeah, I've done it again. Political infrastructure is the term there that I'll take issue with, because that term really refers to large sections of the South Vietnamese population, civilian population. So the CIA were attempting to destroy the Viet Cong insurgency by neutralizing its civilian supporters, essentially. And if that sounds pretty dark on paper, it was quite a bit worse in reality. And so our mate Mills, Barry's mate Mills in the CIA, he's replaced at this point by a guy called Stu Methven. And he came to Peterson with orders straight from Saigon, And he said, look, Barry, you need to start setting up so-called counter-terror teams or CT teams. Barry goes back and says, what are they going to be doing? It turns out these are just assassination squads that are going to be sent in to eliminate not just VC, but VC sympathizers.
Just villagers that
gave
them some food.
Maybe gave them a bit of rice, yeah. And Methven said at this point that it's the only way to fight the insurgency, to beat the VC at their own brutal game. He said, we've got to take terror to the VC. Use their own tactics against them.
Yeah, Stu sounds like a bit of a dick.
Yeah, like accent aside, the content of what he's saying is also dickish.
Yeah.
But I mean, that was a pretty common approach, and increasingly so as the war dragged on. But it's important to note, we're at 1965 at this point.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like we're at the conclusion of the war where everyone's finally gone, yeah. Like this is the first point when Australian soldiers are on the ground, 1965.
Yeah.
And I remember clips from a PBS documentary about the My Lai massacre a few years ago, and the moment of sudden realization that a whole bunch of different soldiers got at different times throughout their tour in Vietnam, where they'd go into a village, you know, by day, and they'd hand out lollies to the kids, they'd chuck a football, play a little dice game, something like that. It's all smiles and well wishes and stuff. Then as they're leaving the village, one of their buddies steps on a mine and, you know, he's gone.
Yeah.
And the real moment of clarity in those stories always occurs when the penny drops and they go, well, wait a minute, how come none of these villagers are ever stepping on a mine on their way out of the trail?
Yeah, like, someone in this village, maybe all of this village.
Yeah. It's like either they know where the stuff is, where the mines, where the booby traps are, and they're not sharing the information, or worse, they're putting them there in the first place. And so this is the response to that realization. That's the rationale. And so there's a degree of truth to it. There's a quote from Mao Zedong. You know, he talks about guerrilla warfare and what it's like. He says the guerrilla must move amongst the people as a fish swims in the sea.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what it's like in South Vietnam for these invading forces.
And that's what they say is one of the hardest things is you didn't know who was friend or foe because it could be anyone.
How could you possibly know?
And it was kind of the first war like that where it wasn't obvious who was on which side.
Yeah. And so if you look at it from that perspective, like a dispassionate computer program going, well, our strategy currently is not super effective, then maybe the Phoenix program's a great idea if it's numbers on a spreadsheet. Barry didn't want a bar of it though.
Good on you, Barry.
He doesn't care for the strategic perspective involved there. It's more about the human perspective for him. He believed that if he did this, they would be, quote, staring into the abyss.
Nice.
So summary executions of civilians based on flimsy intelligence was the order of the day. Torture, terror, as fundamental weapons of war.
Yeah.
And he'd seen the VC commit acts like this. He'd seen beheadings and mutilations as punishment, but he'd vowed that he would fight against that savagery and that he would never participate in it. I do wonder, though, whether he was perhaps overreacting a little bit, because it wasn't just going to be unrestrained violence. The groups that the CIA wanted to control here, like these assassination squads, they had an 8-point code of conduct that they had to abide by. So I think Barry was probably being a bit dramatic. So the first of these 8 points, always be polite.
Yeah, nice.
So before and after your murder.
As you break their arm.
Yeah, be polite about it. There's no reason not to use manners. Number 2, pay the right price for anything you want.
Yeah. Okay.
I did put emphasis on the anything you want part.
Yeah.
Because it sounds a little more like permissive than restrictive. So pay the right price. That's fairly ambiguous.
Yeah.
Point number 3, return what you borrow.
That's good.
On principle, that's a pretty good rule to live by.
Is that the same of something you take or just what you borrow?
I don't know. But I also don't know how much borrowing of Vietnamese peasants' stuff a CIA-funded counter-terror group. You're like, can we borrow that fork? Give us some of your dirt.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Pay for anything you lose or damage.
Nice.
Which, again, on paper's fine. I don't know how well they're itemizing the damages as they go through these villages. Do not be overbearing.
Oh, yeah. Good.
So,
good.
If an old man seems suspicious, kill him. But don't overstay your welcome.
Yeah. In and out.
Don't ask for too much steamed cassava. Do not destroy crops. That one's pretty good. You know, we're after an enemy here, but wheat is not the enemy. Or
That weed looked at me funny.
Yeah.
Burn it.
And the second last one, do not molest women, which you would like to think it didn't have to be like written down on a card.
Not sure how well that was followed, that one.
Because that's the thing as well, is if you are the type to go and do a little bit of molesting, it's not like you're just about to get started and you go, wait a minute, what was on that card? Pull the card out, it's written down, you're like, nearly. But I think as well, it's one of those situations where like rules like that aren't necessarily to protect the women in this case or the people of the villages. It's so that if you need to punish a soldier who goes too far in whatever way, you're like, well, look.
We put in the rules.
Yeah, we told you. We told you not to. I don't know. And the last of these 8 points was treat prisoners fairly but firmly.
Emphasis on the firmly.
Yeah, it's nice and loose because you need a bit of flexibility and more.
Bit of wiggle room.
Yeah, a little bit of wiggle room there. Fairly but firmly. Anyway, I don't know whether Barry would have been impressed by those rules or not. What is clear, though, is that when the CIA sent an agent named Bill Smith to start recruiting Barry's own Montagnards for the assassination squads, Barry was spitting chips. He sent the CIA packing. He called in a plane. He's like, oi, come and get your man Smith, because I hate the guy. Get him out of here. But in doing that, he's, in getting rid of Smith, but also just dismissing the order, he severely ruffled a lot of feathers.
Oh, there's a few toes being stepped on there.
Yeah, some pretty fancy birds whose plumage is being messed with.
Yeah.
Frank Walker writes, sending a CIA agent packing from a base that was, after all, financed and part of a CIA program must have infuriated Methven. Their concerns about Peterson's behaviour had intensified, and their fears the Australian Army officer seemed to be involving himself even more deeply in Montagnard affairs seemed justified. And their fears were probably not entirely unjustified.
Yeah.
Barry wrote in his memoirs of the growing affection for the Montagnards that he had and the really deep sympathy for their cause. And CIA stooge Methven certainly noticed. He started referring to Barry as Lawrence of the Highlands. Not as a compliment, not the glorious portrayal of Lawrence of Arabia, but more of a, you've gone rogue, mate, you've lost the plot.
Yeah.
And things basically kept going in that way. Barry outgrew his original base, and so he needed another one. And when it was finished, the locals named it Dam San Base. And that was the name of a figure from Vietnamese legend. It was this demigod warrior who couldn't be defeated by anyone or anything except the sun. And it was the nickname that the Montagnards used for Big Barry.
He needs to put on some sunscreen.
Yeah. And more villagers would arrive. They'd turn up. They're dressed in these hand-woven religious costumes. They're black and red. They're carrying gifts. They've got offerings for Barry. And essentially they're pleading for protection. Can you send some of your tiger men to protect our village? And Barry later reflected on this time. He wrote, maybe I was only a minor monarch, but I was as close as anyone got to being the absolute ruler of his own little cabbage patch. So, the nickname that they have for him refers to a demigod.
Yeah.
He's receiving tributes from people that travel a long way, asking for his help.
He's got his own little kingdom going on, eh?
He does a little bit, yeah. And matters sort of came to a head in 1965. A group of Montagnards known as Full Row were now operating over the border in Cambodia, and their agenda ultimately was Montagnard independence. And they were willing to offer their soldiers, the ones they had in Cambodia, they had about 1,000 men, to the war, to the South Vietnamese effort, if their independence would be upheld.
Are you talking about their own little country?
No, they wanted, possibly. They wanted independence as an ethnic group. They wanted to be recognised as something more than they had been. But yeah, geographically to be given a little something.
Yeah.
They were indigenous to those Central Highlands. They rejected the idea of being completely Vietnamese. That was sort of the angle they were coming from. And so they're like, well, we'll fight for you if you'll back us up when push comes to shove.
Yeah.
The Full Row leaders arrived for a meeting with Barry and CIA operative Dorsey Anderson. And the CIA were immediately annoyed by the fact that the delegation would only speak to Barry alone. So they've had their toes stepped on again. It's a bit insulting at this point. As he always did, though, Barry handled this delicate situation expertly. He tells the Full Row they have to negotiate directly with the South Vietnamese government. He's like, I'm nobody. You have to deal with them. Like, that's who your issue is with.
Yeah.
But he also stressed, he's like, don't go in there and make demands. Just say, we're here to offer our services, build up that goodwill, and then once all the dust is settled, that's when you say, look, this is what happened and we really came and helped you when you needed it.
Yeah.
So that's what he says. They agree. They're like, yep, okay. They go in for a meeting with General Lu Lan, and right at the outset, very start of this meeting, they just slammed down on the table this massive list of demands, and the meeting was over at the beginning. Barry's irate. They did the thing that he told them not to do with the consequence that he predicted happening. It turned out, though, that this was the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of Barry being supported in South Vietnam. So Stu Methven, CIA stooge, now basically Barry's nemesis in the CIA, accused him of undermining the South Vietnamese government and of sympathizing with the Montagnard rebels. So painted Barry as the guy that has said, yeah, go in there and demand this.
Yeah.
You know, and that he'd sided with them over his original cause and his allies and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, the story that they told was that Barry had either suggested or encouraged the demands to be made. And the new American ambassador at the time, he'd replaced Henry Cabot Lodge in 1964. He'd really openly questioned why there was an Australian guy running this program. He's like, why would we not have an American doing it? And there was a bit of a divide around this time as well. Australian intelligence operatives were not allowed into the CIA briefing rooms and things like that. It was starting to become...
So they're isolating him.
Yeah, it was, not just him though, but the Australians in general.
Yeah.
The Americans really wanted to do things their own way and control things. So Barry's summoned to Saigon. He's given an ultimatum: leave Vietnam immediately or face the consequences. And at this point, the South Vietnamese want him gone after that debacle with Phu Ro, where they think he's the one that's dictating these demands, plus his increasing influence over this Montagnard group, which, you know, as we said early in this episode, South Vietnam has always been wary of. Like, we don't want this group to be organized. We don't want them to be armed. And all of a sudden, they're organized, they're armed, and they have this figurehead right at the beginning who's now starting to create friction with South Vietnamese government as well.
Yeah.
So Barry goes around and he attempts to exhaust pretty much all of his political capital. Anyone that he thinks will help him, he's like, look, this is the situation, will you help me? And a few people are sympathetic to his cause, but he doesn't get enough support. Not from the Australians, not from the Americans, nobody.
Yeah, and who wants to take on the CIA?
Yeah. Local CIA branch chief Tom Donahue said to Barry, you have developed a personality cult in the Highlands.
Yeah.
So that idea of him being the center of attention and that cult of personality. And Barry's a fighter, but he's also a realist. And like you said, who wants to take on the CIA? Well, Barry doesn't. It's a battle he can't win. He knows that. But he's absolutely devastated. He says of this time, our system of mobile patrols was working. We were expanding. We had found a successful formula to hold back the Viet Cong in the province when other provinces were losing against them. Most other groups went out and did one patrol, then hurried back to camp thinking the work was done, claiming their area was clear of VC. Our Tiger men continued patrolling over and over. They carried out ambushes and they knew their area like the back of their hand. We had frequent clashes with the VC, but our casualties were low compared to theirs. We had the highest kill-to-casualties ratio of any force in Vietnam. Our hit-and-run tactics made the VC enlarge their forces to groups of 20 to 30 and even 40, so it became easier for us to keep track of them and inflict more casualties. We had turned the tables on them by doing exactly what they had been doing successfully for years. So Barry's looking at, 16, 17 months of his work, and it's turned out as well as he could have possibly hoped. Barry's isolated in Saigon for a while, before being given one final farewell by the Montagnards, before he goes back to Australia.
Surely they give him his peacocks.
Yeah, well, peacocks and more.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a massive ceremony.
Yeah.
Picture Vietnamese jungle, big long house, open walls on either side, but roof over the top.
Yeah.
Jars of rice wine everywhere. It's hard to walk. There's so much of it, teeming with life and maggots and all the horrible stuff that was in those jars. There were a bunch of chickens and pigs. There were 3 buffalo. So in the biggest moments where they were really honoring something important, 1 buffalo would be sacrificed. Barry's farewell, he gets 3.
Oh.
So the buffalo were killed. Almost all of the blood is collected and just chugged down.
Huh?
People are loving it.
Drinking it?
Yeah, have a little sip.
Mate.
Be rude not to.
Ah.
And Barry, he's one of the first amongst them. And speeches and songs are performed. They're all proclaiming Barry's greatness. All of that sort of drifting out into the jungle night. 300 of Barry's best soldiers parade in front of him. and stand to attention. He shakes every single one of them by the hand, looks into their eyes, and recalls seeing tears in the eyes of many.
Yeah.
By the time he gets to the end of the line, he was crying too. I mean, everyone's hopped up on rice wine and
Probably got a
buffalo blood.
Broken wrist by the end.
Yeah. Barry's then seated in the place of honor on woven mats at the end of the longhouse. A buffalo head is placed at his feet, and a sorcerer hovers above him, chanting spells to honor and protect him for the rest of his life.
When you say hovers above him, what do you mean? Like floating in the air?
Let's go with that.
Okay.
Yep. Let's just assume that that's the case. That's not all, though. An axe head is placed at his feet, and as we all know, the correct thing to do when you have an axe head placed at your feet is to lift one foot and gently place it on top of the axe head. As you do that, wine will be poured over your foot. Simultaneously, a chicken,
I don't like where this is going.
with its wings out, squawking, will be waved in circles over your head. All of this happened to Barry. Barry was so special that he didn't even have to hold his own jar of rice wine. So someone else was holding it for him, and there was a really long bamboo straw, also held by people, traveling from the jar to his mouth, so he could just take a little sip. It was the original Camelback. It's just dangling in front of his mouth.
Oh, good. This sounds like a great little shindig.
So, you know, a lot of people said he didn't really go that native, but this suggests that he's gone some way there.
He's gone all the way.
So as they started to get steamed, people began to shuffle forward, and they're offering gifts and tributes. They counted. By the end of the ceremony, Barry was apparently wearing 220 bracelets on his wrists. He had 10 necklaces of amber beads on his neck.
Mate.
So it's like Jim Jones level of cultic celebration. It's wild in the middle of the jungle. And an Australian journalist went along for the ride. Dennis Gibbons had been invited to attend the ceremony, take some photographs for posterity. And you can imagine him, you know, with no prior involvement with Barry or Montagnards or anything. He's just sitting there going, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah.
Frank Walker describes Gibbons as a real veteran reporter. Like, he'd traveled around a lot. He'd been injured multiple times in combat, and he had a good radar for what was sensible, what was stupid.
Yeah.
And Gibbons later reflected on this ceremony, saying, I knew he was being kicked out of the Highlands, and I wasn't surprised after I saw him all dressed up in the native clothes. Peterson had lost the plot. He'd gone feral. He had committed the worst thing an army officer working behind the lines could commit. He'd gone native. There is a little bit more to Barry's story, but that's essentially the meat on the bone.
Yeah.
It's the story that we're going to tell. He did go back for a second tour. He went back as a major, and he did well. He was mentioned in dispatches for being brave, but he was blocked from any further promotion in the Australian Army.
Oh.
And he eventually left the military. He moved to Bangkok and helped... Started a zoo, yeah. He's got the largest peacock collection in Thailand. No, he set up a business that would help. It would sort of act as the intermediary and help other businesses get established in Southeast Asia.
He's obviously a big fan of Asia then, isn't he?
Yeah.
Southeast Asia.
Yeah, we said that in our second episode, I think, that he was just fascinated by the area and the people and the ancientness of the culture.
Koh San Road.
There was an article in the Sydney Morning Herald which suggests maybe that Barry didn't completely leave his life of spycraft behind, that he worked behind the scenes to help Montagnards who fled Vietnam, and that he remained an international man of mystery with contacts deep inside the foggy world of spies and secret agents. The same Sydney Morning Herald article states that Barry passed away in February of 2019. He was 84 years old, and he had succumbed to a long battle with cancer. And he'd always maintained that he'd developed cancer as a result of prolonged exposure to Agent Orange.
Yeah.
There were plenty of rumours floating around after Barry left Vietnam that if he hadn't gone as peacefully as he did, the CIA were planning to shoot him in the face.
Oh, surely they would have done something a bit more sneaky, like shoot him in the back of the head.
In the back, yeah, maybe. Barry was told by a mate in the Army, the intelligence service as well, and a pretty well-connected reporter that was the case.
Mm-hmm.
But in the decades since then, there's been a bit of pushback on that story, but Barry's story sort of in general. But the pushbacks also come from a source that you have to sort of look at critically.
Yeah.
So Stu Methven, CIA stooge at large, who went on to have a pretty prominent role in a lot of CIA activities.
Did a lot of dodgy stuff.
Yeah, he was a real cloak and dagger guy. Anyway, it's an interview, I think it was from 2008. He said, Barry was a pain in the ass, and there were people who would have been pleased to see him gone. But to say that he would have been killed if he had not left the Highlands is so off the wall, it is unbelievable.
Off the wall.
I found Peterson to be a fabulist, a teller of fables.
Ah.
I don't think he really means fables, because fables generally involve a moral and animals as the protagonists, but, you know, his story's full of holes.
Yeah.
So who knows the absolute truth behind Barry's story, but it's a bloody good story.
Yeah. I'm glad you told it.
That's the end of it.
Yeah, well
I'm
done.
not going to tell you any more.
Nice. Hey, there we go.
We did it. We did the third episode.
We've made it to the end.
We can continue on with the podcast and our lives.
Of our Vietnam trilogy.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Yeah, well done. Hey.
Thanks for sticking in there, listeners who listened to the first two. And yeah.
Another episode down in Pacific Legends Unleashed. Nice.